Wowie wow, wow. What an episode. By the way, a lot of the ladies on this show have been wearing some beautiful sweaters, so I wanted to get in on the 1960s sweater action. So fun. So last week, as you know, I thought for the first time, which was interesting because a lot of you really liked that episode. I want stuff to happen, darn it. I know a lot of you like the feels. But I was like, man, are they going to do what Disney Plus does? And that's after episode 5, an explosive episode 5, it all goes downhill. That is not what happened at all. This was such a wonderful surprise. So much happens in episode 7. In fact, when Pennywise was like, nighty-night, I was like, is episode 8 just going to be like a wrap-up episode? But then, oh my God, there was rumors this episode was an hour and a half, and it was just an hour, but it felt like an hour and a half. But then General Shaw's like, I don't want to contain the entity. I want to let it loose. With reasoning so mega, for a moment there, I thought I was watching The Boys. Whew! Or perhaps Watchmen. You know, recently on one of my breakdowns, one of you commented that Welcome to Derry is strikingly similar to Watchmen in its social and political commentary. And I agree. There are very strong parallels. How it was so unjust that people didn't watch Watchmen. If people are watching Welcome to Derry, it's tricky when you get political. I do think it limits the audience somewhat. What do you think is going to do to Welcome to Derry? Because, you know, they've had like some social commentary, but they've mostly kept it to like the 1960s. What do you think of them kind of weighing in on current events? This episode, it made me gasp and it made me cry. I gasped. I actually moved and covered my mouth and jumped, watching a screener here at my desk, no less, when a blood-dipped Pennywise, like an ice cream bar, jumped out at will in that kitchen. That was incredible. I even knew he was there, but when he jumped out, it was so shocking and scary, and they did such a good job ramping up the tension with Pennywise on the phone as Ronnie. It was amazing. And then, of course, they actually got me to cry with Rich's sacrifice. A knight saving his fair maiden, or in this case, pirate, Indiana Jones style. Hey, I called out Stranger Things, and also a nod to Titanic. You know, I called out Stranger Things 5 for borrowing a lot of stuff. So I gotta be fair, and I gotta do the same for Welcome to Derry. And then we'll dive into what I think is not just the best episode of Welcome to Derry so far, but one of the best, most rewarding episodes of any streaming show to date. What did you think of episode 7? So like Michael Bolton, someone working on this show is a major cinephile. I love that music video. I watch it every once in a while. And we all love movies too. So did you spot these movie references? Indiana Jones was a big one. At first with nuking the fridge. A moment in Indiana Jones 4, so ridiculed by audiences. Did you see Indiana Jones 4 in theaters? I did, and I still remember the audience's, and my own WTF reaction to this sequence. And it became the new Jumping the Shark. And it's weird to pay homage to a moment in a franchise that ruined the franchise. Same for Jumping the Shark with Happy Days. What the phrases stand for is so incredulous and so silly and so ridiculous that it just breaks the illusion and people just can't get back in. So at first I thought Dick Hallorann was going to get into the fridge, but instead it was Marge that got into the cooler. By the way, I looked it up because I was like, I don't think that's going to work, Marge. And in real life, it would not. A cooler is about maintaining temperature. It does not withstand external temperatures, particularly not external heat. I mean, the way that building was on fire, I was thinking it would melt the plastic of the cooler, and it probably would have. In 1960s, they built stuff like a tank back then. But it's weird. Sometimes things were really well built. Sometimes they weren't. I don't think it would have worked in real life. But another movie reference, as I said, Titanic. Only enough room in the life raft for one. So the guy makes the ultimate sacrifice for the girl that he loves. And then they did Indiana Jones again with the crate. It was like a mini version of the same crate. They even carried it the same way. Maybe that's how they carried stuff around in the military back then. But, one of course held the Lost Ark, and this one holds one of the bars of Pennywise's cage. When it became clear they were going to melt that thing down, I was like, maybe they're going to make bullets out of it. That's not a bad idea. I thought that'd actually be kind of cool. But no, they just want to straight up destroy it to set Pennywise free. I don't know why a molten, wouldn't just moving it set him free? I guess they don't want anyone to be able to use it. But I don't know if you can destroy that star just by melting it down. I mean, maybe threw it into I don't know how hot the military could get that, especially in the 1960s. Maybe someone should check to see if this military base is actually inside the town limits of Derry after all, because this is some weird stuff, man. Is Pennywise responsible for this, or is General Shaw just that crazy? His reasoning is that because it's the civil rights era, which is reflected a lot in Charlotte, I think it becomes even more clear why they decided to make her a civil rights movement person. But Shaw feels that civil rights are going to start another civil war. A lot of things people worry about today. And Shaw feels if everyone is so concerned about their rights, let's remind them what is really important, and that's not having to worry about getting killed, apparently. And so he's like, let's release Pennywise and get everyone back on the same page, which, by the way, is a true political strategy. But you're supposed to it's really horrific, actually, because, while a lot of politicians probably tell themselves they're only saying something, they're just saying something is something to be afraid of, I think a lot of times they don't realize that the hate they create leads to real life violence. Although that is what happened at the Black Spot. But Shaw says, hey, it got everybody back on the same page. Everything's back to normal after a really bad night. And Shaw says, for him, that's a worthy trade-off. I wonder if Leroy's still all into the, a real hoorah guy into the military by the end of this season. So Leroy says, what about all the kids that Pennywise is going to kill? And Shaw says, hey, more kids are going to die in car accidents every year. And it's an interesting contrast to the Native Americans. Well, it's interesting. It's a contrast and a comparison or a parallel, because the younger generation of the Native Americans is like, why aren't we just let 23 adults and 17 kids die? And the elders are like, well, why don't you think of everybody that we saved, right? By keeping the entity in its cage. And I think both, particularly, and they're both older generations, are willing to accept collateral damage. That's also an interesting commentary. Younger generations are like, we can change things. And older generations who are like, maybe we can't. It's all about coming to terms and finding a way to excuse what can't be changed. But you don't have to let Pennywise out of his cage, man. All right, now we all know that Pennywise doesn't escape. We've seen the next 27-year cycle with Pennywise still stuck in Derry. So it'll be interesting to see how in a single episode, how and who manages to keep Pennywise in his cage. By the way, with just one episode left to go, the finale, the season finale, they haven't, some of you said this show was renewed yet. As of my taping this breakdown, it has not yet officially been renewed, even though the Muschettis have said they would like to do 2 more seasons. But anyway, there's definitely one more episode coming, so be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss my breakdown next Sunday night. Also, Avatar is about to hit theaters. I'm going to be reviewing it, doing a spoiler review, and of course, all the trailers. We're finally getting big trailers again. There's going to be a ton of trailers in front of Avatar. I'm going to be reacting to them, breaking them down, and if you subscribe, you won't miss any of those videos. And why not hit the notifications bell so you know as soon as the videos go up. All right, so yeah, let's talk Pennywise. I think it's good that this show has still maintained the mystery around the character. There's still so much we don't know about Pennywise, but we did learn a lot this week. So yeah, that's not Bob Gray. But as we suspected, it saw his show at the fair, the carnival, and well, let's just say it's a fan. Loving how the kids are drawn to Pennywise. Or are they? This was funny because, Pennywise had this real Cirque du Soleil act, very highbrow, very, again, European. And I was surprised that those kids, I mean, I know it was 1908. I was like, is this what passed for entertainment in 1908? I was impressed with the mechanics of the routine, the way they had the certain like elements interact with Pennywise. But, I don't think they liked it because then, of course, at the end, they jumped up on the stage and started tearing everything apart. So it's funny. Pennywise, it's like, I liked your show. How'd you like it to run forever? That's pretty funny. It was also funny, of course, that these kids were terrorizing Pennywise and popping all those red balloons. And that, of course, would go on to become, a demise for children. They really flipped the tables on those little kids. So, by the way, also, did you spot the Andy Muschietti cameo? Bob was unhappy. He was unhappy. He was no longer in the big show, the big tent. He'd left. Well, they didn't really make it clear if he left the circus because his wife had died, who was his performing partner, or if, maybe he got kicked out. I told you I thought his act was a choice. It was very, very avant-garde. I think Pennywise might have been ahead of his time. What did you think of the act? But yeah, so, he's really having a hard time, but he loves his daughter, right? And she movingly wanted to follow in his footsteps, which I think, of course, is probably extremely rewarding for him. And he wants to give her mother's stage name that she had. I thought that was nice. Although they said it was going to be Periwinkle, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said it should have been Pennywise and Pennywhistle. And I was like, that's pretty funny. I think both of them were sad, Bob and Ingrid, but their love for each other kept them going. And that's why that same love ultimately drove Ingrid insane when her father disappeared and she was abandoned by both her parents. Speaking of dead parents, that exchange between Bob and It, who came to him as a child, I guess at first It was like, hey, kids like other kids, right? Maybe that's why he took on that form. It was so different, not even like, I wonder where the kooky and craziness came from. I mean, even Bob wasn't that kooky and crazy. Maybe It spent too much time alone. But it was such a different entity. Some of you have said this show is reminding you a bit of Weapons. And the little boy that came to him reminded me a little of the boy from Weapons. But also, why didn't it come to Bob as his dead wife or something like that? I mean, I guess it was still evolving. Although, no, he was using those tricks with the Native Americans and the settlers back in the day. But when the little boy said, I can't find my parents, and Bob answered, neither can I, they're dead, as he took a swig, I was like, that is a very compelling rock bottom. I thought that was amazing. I'm surprised, as depressed as he was, that Bob agreed to help It. It was really a very bizarre, weird, off-kilter, and also very touching scene, when It took Bob's hand and that surprised him, maybe because he felt so alone, like that. But it was actually the end of his life, like if he felt he was stuck, he was in a dead end and he was about to be dead. But perhaps also the screams of a woman in the distance did, tap into the sadness that he felt for what happened to his wife. What did you think of that fateful interaction? So as Pennywise says, Ingrid in 1962 did good, getting him enough food so that he can now go back into hibernation. What a shot, like a bear, with his stored up food all around him for the winter, submerged in blood and body parts. And I liked when he opened his eyes and looked around and was like, something different. I think my cage door might be open. That was fantastic. Isn't it interesting that is he going to go after Will? Is he going to go after the military? What's he going to do? He's only got one episode to decide. Decisions. He even does Ingrid a favor, taking out her husband with, poetically, a cleaver. I saw a couple of people, because that shot with him and the cleaver had been shown in preview footage, saying, what's Pennywise need a giant cleaver for? Well, he's a showman. But, of course, Stanley Cleaver got taken out with a cleaver. And he doesn't kill her. I mean, that's, for Pennywise, that is pretty nice. I thought it was very powerful when he did ask to see her bow again. That was just an incredible moment. And I thought, like Ingrid, that maybe Bob was somewhere in that monster. But he's not. When she begs Pennywise not to leave her again, and he insists he'll see her in 27 years, eat your vegetables and make sure you go to the doctor, Ingrid, right? She realizes he can't be her father, or else he wouldn't leave her. And the matter-of-factness in which Pennywise admits he just simply ate Bob Gray, like there was no big ceremony. He didn't absorb Bob Gray. He didn't become Bob Gray. He just ate him like he does everybody else. That was really chilling. I think that might be one of the scariest things I've ever seen Pennywise do. But while he lets Ingrid live, she doesn't get away scot-free. She looked incredible this episode, by the way. I really didn't like the glimpses of her costume from before, last episode, but wow, did it work out. She looked great. And when she took her wig off, I thought she reminded me she went from Harley Quinn to Punchline, interestingly enough. Hey, some of you were like, why's everything got to be DC with you? That's my touch point. I don't know what to tell you. Just like over in Stranger Things, everything's Dungeons and Dragons to those kids. All right. And that was just an amazing shot. So many great shots with her in her costume. And I love the heart detail on her nose, by the way. I thought that was great. And I also loved when she came out to her husband, right? And was like, this is who I really am. And, sure enough, Stanley did not have a good reaction. He was a jerk. Like a murderer, in fact. Pennywise does use the deadlights on her, which, according to the lore, either kill you or drive you insane. Beverly was fine, though, it seems. But here, it seems to have driven Ingrid mad. Although I think the realization that she really has lost her father after holding on to hope for so long and still seeing him and finding out that he was eaten, that's pretty bad. I think that maybe it wasn't even the deadlights. And anyway, it does indeed seem like Ingrid is going back to Juniper Hill, but this time as a patient. And I loved when it looked like at first she was just blankly staring off into nowhere, and then her focus shifted, and you were like, oh, she's still in there. That was great. What are they going to do with Ingrid? We know she's not. Is that her? But she turns into Pennywise, when she becomes that demon, right? Like with the elongated limbs as he has in his other entities. I think she's too good a character to just throw away. I hope that they do. She and Dick Hallorann are great characters that I would like to see continue. And the problem is that Welcome to Derry is a show that's going to go backwards with its seasons to the different feeding periods. The next season would be 1935 and then 1908. What would you like to see happen? One of you said that there should be a Dick Hallorann spinoff where he goes to work at the Overlook Hotel. And I'm all in on that. Maybe Ingrid goes to work there too? I know that Charlotte is extremely well-intentioned and she doesn't have a lot of options. And I've loved the character. I think the actress who plays her does a wonderful job. But it's going to be tough to forgive her and Hank for basically being responsible obviously it's the white mob that's responsible, but they were the catalyst for putting all these innocent people, or getting all these innocent people killed. Charlotte for asking them to hide Hank there, and Hank for stepping forward and revealing that he was there when the black soldiers were trying to bluff that white mob, and maybe would have been able to do it. Where was the back door in this building, right? The white mob wasn't smart enough to surround the building. Hank could have gotten out, and then also maybe people could have escaped. Some people could have, more people could have survived. And, isn't that always the way it is? The people responsible for a bad situation are one of the only few ones to survive it. How do you feel about Charlotte after what happened? I was very proud of Dick Hallorann for stepping up, though, even though he was so against Hank even being there in the first place. But hey, this was the cards that had been dealt, and he stood up. Dick Hallorann did a lot of right things. He's just such a stand-up, wonderful guy. And again, as I said, I don't see how Leroy could continue to be faithful to the military, with Shaw happy to sacrifice his own men for the greater good. The whole disaster explained away, we hear on the radio, as an electrical fire where Grogan, they said he was killed, so everybody doesn't have to worry about that anymore, right? And then also that Stanley Kersh was a hero. What is it they say about the importance of who writes the history books? That was incredible. I can't believe, as I said, that those soldiers would build a club, or that there would be a military building that didn't have more than one exit. And it was crazy also during the fire that all the main characters of the show were in the middle of the room, right at the center of the burning building, where all these poor red shirts ran around them dying. I was like, you don't have to make it so obvious who's going to live and who's going to die. I thought it was, we're going to talk about Rich. I thought it was terrifying and very accurate how fast the club went up in flames. And it was just so sad to see it. I really felt so horrible for all the innocent people who were killed, who never even knew Hank was there. I felt so sad for them. But there were two supernatural entities at work here, Pennywise and Mr. Dick Hallorann. So clearly, Dick Hallorann is a loner. I mean, he's very personable and charismatic. He's like one of those people who has friends, but nobody really knows him. I think because of his abilities, and he's closed himself off, not only inside with that box, but I think outside as well. And his only real, I think, person who was in his life was his grandmother, because she had the same abilities. And, you know, she has died. But in Derry, he has started to make some human connections, as we've seen on this show. And at first, he follows a ghost. It was interesting to see how he could use the dead, right? He follows that old soldier to find the way out it turns out it's under that fridge. And he could have just saved himself. And for a moment, he was tempted to. But again, in Derry, Dick has formed ties, right? So he couldn't leave his newfound friends to die. So he does something pretty extraordinary. He talks to the dead. And not just any dead, but the chief who sacrificed herself in the flashback so that her daughter could go on and avenge her, and was the one who caged Pennywise all those years ago. The chief leads him through the flames and the smoke to Hank, Ronnie, and Will, who he saves, but the roof falls in before he can get to Rich and Marge. I kept hoping that he was going to get to them. Speaking of the dead, while most of the dead have clouded over eyes, did you notice that when Pennywise sends a bunch of ghosts after Dick, they have lights in their eyes, which I think represent the dead lights. So Pennywise doesn't just eat you apparently, but therefore gains control of your soul? Were those like just another illusion from Pennywise, or were those actually the souls? I'm not sure. It might be, now that I think about it, just an illusion. Because he knows that's probably what it was. Because he knows that Dick is afraid of the dead, overwhelming him. So, of course, once again, Pennywise plays off your fears and creates your worst nightmare. But then why not make them look like the way they do for Dick? You know, I do wonder if maybe we still haven't seen the last of Bob Gray. I think it's crazy that you would not have Dick Hallorann, who can see the dead, see the real Bob Gray to offer Ingrid some kind of closure or something. I think that's a beautiful idea, and I really hope that it happens. We got one episode left for it to happen. So yeah, now that Dick has talked to the dead, just as he said would happen, they can now see him. And it's worse than ever. It's like when Jean Grey first gets her powers. I really hope that he obviously gets it under control to some point, because again, when we see him years later at the Overlook Hotel, he has it under control. But you know, I think it was not only overwhelming in terms of like a sensory situation, but he knew those people. Those were his friend. You know, well, again, you know, he doesn't really have any friends, but they were people he was literally just with, having a good time at the Black Spot. And it was very sad to see people who had just been alive now so confused about what had happened to them. And the answer being so sad, very sad. So Dick pays the chief back for helping him by saying, hey, let's follow her back to her grave, where we know there is a pillar buried, information that Dick Hallorann got from when he was in Daniel's mind. So, but you know, I mean, at this point, Dick also believes the mission is to stop Pennywise, and he can sense that Pennywise has gone to sleep. So he's like, this is the perfect time to stop him. But while Pennywise has gone to sleep, this was his last big hurrah. Remember, at the end of every feeding cycle, there's a big explosive event where Pennywise can really stock up on supplies for the winter. And he preys usually he preys on kids, but here he preyed on adults in the fire. Do I have face on my face? Meh, I didn't love that line. I thought it was a little too on the nose. Speaking of going mad, it would seem that holding on to that pillar is finally doing to Lily what the death of her father and going to Juniper Hill twice couldn't do to her. and that's driving her insane. Did you see that dog run out of the room? The dog knows something bad's going on. How sad, considering Lily held out for so long. The military was right to use gloves to pick that thing up. By the way, did you see when that's with the second pillar that it was buried in a turtle shell-shaped container? So many turtle references. Maturin has to show up at some point, don't you? I mean, let's see. They're hoping for multiple seasons. But again, I don't understand why they would have all these turtle references and then have it. It's gotta go. Something's gotta happen in the final episode that is like maturity. So can the Native Americans get Pennywise back into his cage? And can they get Hank Grogan out of town and into Canada? We'll see. Leroy thinks he's going to get his family out of Derry as well once this mission is over. But I'm like, I've seen the future, and you are still, at least his relatives are. Will already has the Hanlon name. We don't know for sure that Leroy's going to make it out of here alive. But of course, his grandson, Mike Hanlon, is there in 1989, working on a farm. So either Leroy will get a farm or maybe Charlotte will. Why would Charlotte stay? Maybe she really doesn't want to stay. She hates Derry. Oh, I hope nothing happens to Charlotte. I mean, I'm upset with her for what happened, but I still want her to be okay. That's interesting. We'll see. Because I don't understand how you could ever get Charlotte to stay there. All right, maybe we'll find out. All right, finally, Rich. We've watched a lot of kids get killed in the It movies and now in this show. And I don't think any of them were as devastating as this one. Perhaps because Rich wasn't killed by Pennywise. He made the decision on his own to sacrifice his life for the girl he was just starting to get to know. And for someone so young to make that decision is particularly brutal. I kept hoping, as I said, that Dick would get through and save them at the last minute. I was literally watching the show being like, come on, Dick, let's do it. But he never got through. And when we didn't see Rich's body right away, when his skeleton or his charred corpse wasn't on top of on the cooler, I was like, is he over? Maybe they're helping him. He's around the corner and he's going to come in and be okay. But he wasn't. You know, a lot of you felt that Rich shined so brightly last episode because he was about to be snuffed out. And you were right. And I think the show did a really good job. I mean, some of you guessed it, but they did a very good job, I think, setting up Rich's death. I guess he said, we have a date. He jinxed himself. It's like Rich was like really close to retirement when he said they had a date for next Halloween. He said we have next Halloween all figured out. But they were thinking date. That's just so sad. But they did a really good job setting everything up. And I think, I think it's incredible that, again, on a show where so many kids are killed, this one hits particularly hard. Will we see him again? Pennywise already pretended to be Ronnie on the phone, twisting Rich's death. Will the show go there? We know Pennywise will be willing to go there, but will they show us Rich again? And how would fans react? I think it would be interesting because it would really show us what it feels like to be tormented by Pennywise, to see something, I think it's not only terrifying, but it seems wrong and sacrilegious. And I think that's another way that Pennywise is unfortunately so effective. But it was incredible. What a wonderful young actor who played Rich. I think all the kid actors on this show are pretty good. Everyone's over there but I have to say the Stranger Things kids I thought were good in earlier seasons. But I think that the acting on this show from the kids, it was interesting. I watched one of the behind the scenes videos and they have an acting coach specifically for child actors. And that guy's doing a really good job. All right, so one more episode to go. Oh my goodness, they crammed so much into this episode. I think we're in for a really good time with the final episode for the season. I wonder if they're going to renew it. I mean, Alien Earth eventually got renewed, so I have faith that this show will as well. But I think it's weird to go backwards. But I really trust the Muschiettis at this point. I think they're doing a wonderful job with this. All right, so what did you think? Share your thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.